We need to have a single African army. We need a single African currency. We need a single African monetary policy. We need our own financial institutions at a continental level, like the African Stock Exchange. All those things need to be addressed. And until we can achieve some of that integration at that level, it's a difficult conversation. Keep in mind, it took us from 1963 to 2018 for us to have the heads of states come up with the decision, which is now the African Continental Free Trade Area, where they have agreed that Africa needs to enter the world market as one customs union. It took us 56 years to get this decision. So you can imagine going back again and trying to start with yet another one. I don't know how long it's going to take us, but I'm hoping that we can all wake up enough and realize that we're still suffering from the legacy of slavery and the legacy of colonization. Because if the truth be told, there are representatives from various governments who are participating in these conversations, and they need to stand up. They need to push back and just tell these colonizers the truth. They are abusing us. They are spitting in our faces. They are beating us up. They are burning us, and we're supposed to be nice. And how long do they need to continue to beat us up before we all come together and say enough is enough? I'm hoping that we are getting to where the average Black person is simply sick and tired of being sick and tired. We can't continue to take this abuse. And they, the colonizers, they know it. They know that they're abusing. That's the sad part. They know they're abusing us, and we need to tell them to stop. That's just all there is to it. They need to stop abusing Africa. They need to stop exploiting Africa. Right. So actually, the point I was trying to make by saying the colonizers are still in Africa, they haven't left. So for over 60 years, we got our independence, different countries. Our only option were the former colonizers, were the West. So it was refreshing to see China coming in and giving us an option. It's actually refreshing to see other countries coming in and giving us an option. So we don't have to be stuck with the former colonizers as the only option. So yes, China was welcome. The only problem is the manner in which China came by insisting on bringing their own employees. But even then, I will say I can let it go because we need to own that responsibility. We should have negotiated better. We should have told China, if you bring in 50 people, then the other 50, if job needs 100 people, 50 should be yours, the other 50 are local, and you gotta train the local people. We failed to do better negotiations, but I can tell you, since the last meeting the heads of states had with the president of China in 2018, a lot of that has changed. A lot of bad contracts that China had been involved with various countries have been canceled. So the heads of state are realizing that, and they are addressing that issue. So I think as far as trading with China, that situation is being addressed and things are getting better. The problem is now with the individual citizens. They're the ones who are just downright racist. Even on the continent, they are abusing the Africans on our own continent. And then, of course, what's happening or in China itself, they just have no respect for Black people. They're racist to the core, some of them. Not all of them, don't get me wrong. Many of them are good people, but we have a significant percentage that are just racist. So if they don't like Africans, then maybe they just need to get out of Africa as well. It's really that simple. I know I heard of Bobby Wine planning on airlifting Africans out of China. Well, my position is if African leaders have to airlift their people out of China, then President Xi Jinping needs to start looking at airlifting his own people out of Africa. But what I do know is we're not taking any abuse anymore from anybody, period. Well, again, that's actually an excuse because they are doing it even on the continent. The underlying factor is that they are racist to the core. There's no way China is the one that started with COVID-19. It's ludicrous to want to blame it on the African. It's just a lame excuse. We are not going to accept that. They are racist people. They should not have been doing what they're doing. Their treatment of Africa is unacceptable, and we will not tolerate it. That's just an excuse. They know COVID-19 started in China, and to want to blame it on the Africans, that is ludicrous. Insanity of the highest order. We will not accept that. President Xi Jinping needs to fix this. This is a very serious matter. They need to understand that we also have our own Africa, and we have our own laws. And so this cannot continue. We only have about 700,000 Africans in China, and there are over 10 million Chinese in Africa. I'm not even sure how they think they can do this and get away with it. Well, they're not going to get away with it this time, because we, the citizens, are not going to sit back and watch this nonsense go on. They need to stop. To accuse the Africans of bringing COVID-19 to China, that is just unbelievable. They are racist. Those who are doing it, who are perpetrating these abuses to the Africans, they are racist, plain and simple. Let's call them what they are. We are very divided as a people, as Black people in general, but more importantly, at this time, with the African Continental Free Trade Area, it is a time that is calling for all of us to unite and begin to look at being on the driver's seat when it comes to the Continental Development Agenda. People must understand the African Continental Free Trade Area is a monumental achievement from the African heads of states, and yet you don't hear too much about it. If we do not unite as children of Africa to really participate in the Continental Development Agenda, then we have no one to blame but ourselves. Mm-hmm. The reality is, development of Africa is now moving to the continental level. Mm-hmm. We're now talking about growing wheat to feed 1.27 billion people. We are now talking about water access to 1.27 billion people, access to power to the continent, not to one country. So the conversation is about infrastructure development at a continental level. Okay. Now, here's what I was able to at least share with the African diaspora, to say, you don't go to China and find Black people driving the Chinese development agenda. You don't go to Mexico, you don't go to Europe and find Black people driving the agendas for those nations. You therefore must not go to Africa and find non-Africans driving the African continental agenda, unless if we, the children of Africa, choose to vacate that place that belongs to us. The heads of states have completed the unfinished business that was started by the Pan-African fathers in 1963 when they created Organization of African Unity, which was a compromise agreement, because the Casablanca group, who were Ghana, Guinea, Mali, Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, they were saying Africa for the Africans, African Union now. Mm-hmm. They wanted the boundaries to disappear. Yeah. But unfortunately, they were not the majority. So they lost. They come up with this compromise. So from 1963 up until 2018, the heads of states had not been able to reach a consensus on this issue, which is so crucial if Africa is to move forward. So it is so important that every person of African descent, people on the continent, understand that if we do not come together and come up with the continent, if we don't come up with the Continental Development Agenda, Chinese are ready. They have their own agenda of how they're going to come to Africa, looking at having 300 million Chinese in Africa by 2030. How crazy is that? Wow. The Europeans are ready. They have their own agenda for Africa. The people who should have an agenda for Africa is us, the African diaspora, and our brothers and sisters on the... We have to realize that this is a do-or-die moment. Yeah. So if you can say there was something I was able to accomplish, was to take that message to the diaspora, to say, my brothers and sisters, we must wake up. But also, secondly, to also share with my brothers and sisters that our problems, yes, we have issues of corruption in Africa, but the biggest corruption in Africa today is coming from outside. I often say, if everybody in Africa was to stop from being corrupt, there will still be corruption in Africa today. And what I was able to really clarify to them is to say, the corruption watchdogs, they tell us 50 billion is getting out of Africa every year from corruption. I get that, and we must go after it. But at the same time, there is 500 billion getting out of Africa from one little country called France. There is so much outrage from the diaspora over the 50 billion, but not a word over the 500 billion going to a small country. That's just the tip of the iceberg. So I wanted the diaspora to understand that don't find yourself being told to fight with your brothers and sisters over which one of you got the larger chunk of the crumb under the table. So you'll never talk about the real meal on the table. Our colonizers are on the table in our house, eating our food. We would have cooked the food, and then after we serve them, we go under the table and wait for them to drop off a few crumbs. And those are the crumbs that we're fighting about. So I wanted everybody to understand that yes, we have issues with corruption, but let's put things in perspective. Because taking care of problem number 6 on a scale of 1 to 10, if you don't address problem number 1 to 5, it doesn't matter what you do with number 6, because the foundation of the problem is still there. The root cause of the problems is still there. And our colonizers are still a big problem, for they never left Africa. They gave us political independence, but they kept the economic independence. I can give you an example right now. There's a company in Zambia called, starts with a G. Can't remember the name. Okay. They just laid off 11,000 people. Why? Because they have not been paying taxes. They're sending all their money through these tax havens. All of these large companies are doing that. So when the government has been trying for years, I think it's so now they're mad at the government and they're packing up and they're leaving. This is what a lot of heads of state are dealing with. These major corporations are not paying taxes. They're sending all their money to these tax havens. This is causing them to take billions out of Africa. Nobody talks about it. So if there's any other accomplishments, was to let the diaspora understand what is really going on in our Africa. We are being robbed in plain daylight. Right. And yet they throw us a shiny object and they want us to run after the shiny object while the real issues are in the opposite direction. So to the diaspora, I say, my brothers and sisters, wake up and smell the coffee. Understand what is really going on in your Africa. I would like to think that maybe that may be what I have been able to make some inroads. We still have a long way to go. But that's conversations that have started, the conversations that are badly needed. Because once we know our history, the rest is easy. Quite often, as diaspora, we are not doing the right thing because we don't know. So we need to understand our issues from the root and not from the superficial point of view that they want us to understand them.
Yeah, but even in the AU, we don't hear anybody who was as vocal as you were, really saying how things are, just how it is. You're just saying things how it is.
Well, I can't speak for others. What I do know is I was asked by Madam Zuma to go to Washington to represent 1.27 billion people. And I was determined I was going to do that. I didn't come to Washington to drink tea and coffee. I didn't come to Washington to make friends. I came to Washington to represent 1.27 billion people. If either I represented the 1.27 billion people or I had no business being there. I could not sit and watch what I saw happening and not speak up to it. I can easily go back to becoming a doctor. I need not have stayed in Washington if I'm only going to be a mute. That's not me. And I came here to work. I rolled up my sleeves and I went to work. Well, I have to say, when you look at the situation with Africa, prior to the Chinese, we had the West. We did have the colonizers and all the atrocities they've been committing, starting with the big one, which is the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization, where, for those who are not aware, the French are taking over $500 billion out of Africa every year. In addition, the French are printing the money for those 14 African countries. If they have to deposit, now they're down to about 50 to 60% of their bank reserves. Should they need some of that money, they have to request it as a loan at commercial interest rates. The French people also have to make sure that all their military equipment can only be ordered from France. Their military can only be trained by France. And the French have military presence in their countries, and that France can invade them without notice if they feel French interests are being violated. They also said all the contracts, private and public, French companies have the first right of refusal. And whatever the French companies do not want, that's what the local Black-owned companies can have. So when you take all that into consideration, there's not much left for the country, which is why even today, the average Black person in some of those countries is struggling to get contracts because most of the contracts are going to the French. So that alone is huge, and it continues to this day. Then you take the remainder of the other countries. If you were a British colony, if you were colonized by the Belgians, the Germans, the Portuguese, all those companies that go back to colonization, they remain the major employers, like what Glencore is doing, just trying to close up and leave 11,000 people unemployed. All those major employers in most of the African countries, they're owned by companies that go back to colonization. They're owned by companies that are, whose bases are in the former colonizers. So we don't have our economic, we don't have control of our economic status in all those African countries. It makes it very difficult for a leader to try and push back against those companies because the retaliation is devastating. So we have to look at some of those basics to say, we still don't own our economy. We don't control the African economies. And that remains a serious challenge. And that was done intentionally by the colonizers through the Berlin Conference. This is why I keep going back to the Berlin Conference, because that is when they set out the strategy to divide us in such a way that we'll always be chasing our little tails as little countries. What's needed is for Africa to come together and speak with one voice. Well, again, you have to realize that and say the West. Let's talk about the main colonizers. We got France, we got Britain, we got Germany, we got Portugal, and some Italian. But at the end of the day, we were divided up into these tiny little countries. Each country has to wage its own battle against the colonizers. So even though the enemy is a common enemy, which is France, Cote d'Ivoire has to fight as Cote d'Ivoire. DRC has to fight as DRC. Senegal has to fight as Senegal. If they were all to come together and speak one voice, they become a bigger voice that can then take a position and say enough is enough. Which is why I go back and say the African Continental Free Trade Area is really the answer to Africa's problems when we can speak with one voice. You know, we really need to realize that if we have to come together, we got to pull on our resources together because we have the financial resources. If you look at the fact that we are putting into Africa with remittances, that's continental Africans alone, over $60 billion every year. That's a lot of money. So you can imagine if we take 1 million diaspora, there are about 9 to 10 million continental Africans. There are about another 40 million African Americans. If you take the United States alone, it's about 50 million Black people. If everybody came up, not everybody, let's just say we take 1 million. 1 million people with $1,000, that's $1 billion. That's how easy we can build up wealth with everybody just coming up with whatever small amount they have, and we keep doing it year in and year out. That's how the Jews do it. They pull their monies together. But we don't believe in each other, we don't trust each other. We become very selfish. It's all about where I come from, my village, my tribe. Not even at a national level are we united. So that remains the biggest problem among us Black people. The divisions among us are killing us. We're living here in the United States, in our case, where we are surrounded by other races who are very united when it comes to issues pertaining to their race. The Chinese are very united, the Indians are very united, the Mexicans, the Irish, the German Americans, Italian Americans. But when you look at Black people, we're so proud to be the only Black people, the Black family living in a white neighborhood. It's like something to be proud of. The other races are so happy to be living alone. You know, we're having Indian communities in this country where they're building their own schools. They're happy to be living in an Indian neighborhood. And yet we Black people, we want to imagine ourselves living in a white neighborhood, and we're out of that. It's really pitiful, but we got to realize that the time for unity is now. If we don't do it for ourselves, we must do it for our children, because we owe it to them to live in a world where they are not disrespected simply because, where they are disrespected simply because of the color of their skin. If that, it's just something that is completely mind-boggling, even though I understand where it's coming from. It's that same legacy of slavery and colonization. The rule of divide and conquer is alive and well among us. The shackles of the mind remain very tight within us. We must first of all understand that we are suffering from this ailment, because it is you with your shackled mind who goes to the boardroom with a shackled mind, garbage in, garbage out. Unless you go to a boardroom with the right mind, with a mind that is awoken, your decisions are going to be against your own race. Sadly, that is our reality. And I tend to dump this on men because they are the majority of who hold leadership roles when it comes to our Africa, for example, and of course, even here in the diaspora. So those who are in leadership roles, those of you who find yourself in the boardrooms, making decisions, representing Africa, ask yourself, am I colonized? Am I suffering from the legacy of slavery? Each and every one of us needs to have a serious conversation with the image in the mirror. That is our biggest problem at this point. If you were to ask people right now to give you $10, I can assure you 6 months from now, they're going to hackle you down over what you have done with my $10. But you can't say you blame them too, because in some cases, people have made contributions and they have lost their money. So both sides, those who want to exploit others, we all need to realize that that time is over. It's about our unity. It's about our survival. It's about us uniting to demand our. If we don't respect ourselves, we expect the rest of the world to respect us. We must come together, 1 million people with $1,000, that's $1 billion. Now make it 2 million people. Now make it 5 million people. There are over 400. There are over 400 African diaspora around the globe. Give me 5 million with $1,000. And then we do it year in and year out. That's why I registered the entity called African Diaspora Development Institute. This institute is where we are all going to come together. I'm looking forward to have people like you open up an ADDI branch in the UK. We can continue. We hope to build Africa houses, starting with 5 of them, 2 in Europe, maybe 3 or 4 in the United States, 1 in China, and 1 in Australia, where we will have conversations about us, where we're going to begin to let everybody know we must get together. We must unite. That is the only way we can get our respect back. So I look forward to hearing all of you. I'm urging all of you to go on to our ADDI, that's OURADDI.org, OurADDI.org, and register. We want to know who you are. We want to know what you do so we can continue to communicate. The plan for ADDI is to open offices in every country. Okay. Can begin to let the heads of states know that no more excuses, no more giving contract to the Chinese first, no more giving contract to the Europeans first, that the children of Africa, with the expertise, with the capacity that is needed, with the funding that is needed, are ready to come home, and that we want to take the driver's seat of Africa's development agenda. That is the plan, that all opportunities must, first right of refusal must be given to the African diaspora. So that is the plan for ADDI. As we open offices in each country, we will be engaging the government and letting them know that the children of Africa are coming home, and that the children of Africa in the diaspora are answering the call from our African heads of states.
Absolutely.